At this very moment, a thought process you haven't yet discovered may be taking place in your horse's mind. Imagine a horse approaching a narrow passage in rocky terrain. It suddenly stops, lost in thought. It turns its head to the side and sizes up the gap with one eye, steps back a few centimeters to adjust its angle, then looks again, all the while as the pebbles shift slightly beneath its hooves. Its ears dart back and forth between the passage ahead and its own rear. Eventually, it either steps through or gives up and looks for another path. This isn't a reflex. It's a genuine engineering calculation, comparing its own body width to the space available. How many seconds does this calculation take? What information does it rely on? And what factors influence the decision? Have you ever wondered? Today, we'll explore step by step just how deep this process actually is. You've surely heard the saying, horses are stupid somewhere. Maybe from a trainer, maybe as a joke, or perhaps from that old assumption that a large-eyed, calm animal doesn't think deeply. The bottom line is simple. People confuse intelligence with reacting like a human. Because a horse doesn't furrow its brow, it's assumed that nothing is going on inside its head. Add to that the cowardice label. A horse startled by a plastic bag fluttering in the wind is often branded as irrational or stupid. The reality is exactly the opposite. Behind that reaction lies a fast, constantly working risk assessment system. It just doesn't operate at the speed you'd expect. After watching this video, you might not be so quick to use the word mindless anymore. Think about it. Even as you watch this video, you're making dozens of small calculations yourself, like narrowing your shoulders as you walk through a doorway or gauging distance in a crowd. None of them give you the feeling that you're thinking, do they? That's because they've become automatic. When a horse performs a similar action, the same thing happens to us. It doesn't look like thinking. Yet it is, it just doesn't fit our definition. Scientists wanted to test this perception in the lab. They placed two objects in front of the horses, making one the correct color or shape and the other the wrong one. A horse that touched the correct object with its nose received a reward. One that touched the wrong one came away empty-handed. While the choices were random in the first trials, after a few repetitions, the horses headed straight for the correct object without hesitation. The stupidity myth was thus debunked. The horses had progressed far more quickly than the researchers had expected. Moreover, the rule they learned wasn't limited to a specific shape, it generalized as well. Instead of memorizing touch this shape, they grasped the logic of choose the correct one. That is, an abstract relationship. This wasn't rote memorization. It was genuine learning. There is another experiment that shows just how far they could take this. The horses were first taught to select the larger of two objects, and then two completely different objects they had never seen before were placed in front of them. If it were a matter of rote memorization, the choice would have been random. Instead, most of the horses correctly applied the rule they had learned to the new objects. This is proof that they grasped not a concrete object but an abstract relationship, a skill considered advanced even in human cognition. So where does that perception of stupidity come from in horses that learn so quickly? The answer likely lies here. The horse isn't learning what you want to teach it, but rather what it considers its own priority at that moment. And these two lists rarely overlap. If there's information it deems vital at that moment, such as whether a distant sound is dangerous or whether the ground beneath its hooves is safe, the horse may prioritize that above everything else. This doesn't mean it isn't learning. It simply shows that its priorities differ from yours. Have you ever stopped to think about how many shortcuts your horse learned last year that you've never even noticed? It might know which corner of a door to push to open it more easily. It might have already figured out which stable mate it'll have less of a scuffle with, or at what time the water trough will run dry. The most striking evidence of this learning speed comes from locked mechanisms. Researchers have documented horses that can figure out complex mechanisms on their own. No one shows them step by step, no one holds their hand. The horse runs its lips over the mechanism, nudges it with its nose, and pauses for a moment as if listening to the sound of the metal. Tries, fails, changes its approach, and tries again. This is trial and error in its purest form. And once a horse has learned to solve a mechanism, even if no one teaches it, the other horses in the stable can observe this and mimic the same behavior, meaning that learning can spread spontaneously within the herd. So why is this so surprising? Because when we think of tool use or mechanical problem solving, Birds, primates, and perhaps dogs come to mind first. Sometimes crows and octopuses are added to the list, species that lack a small brain or a hand-like appendage, yet are still capable of solving complex mechanisms. Horses are almost never included on this list, because no one would even imagine that a horse could solve such a mechanism. Yet this animal, which has neither fingers nor a palm, and possesses a heavy skull and a forelimb structure entirely different from a human's, is able to accomplish a task requiring fine motor skills using only its lips and nose. Despite the limitations of its body, its mind still finds a solution. In observed cases, when a horse first touches the mechanism, it behaves completely randomly, rubbing its nose here and there. After a few attempts, it realizes which direction to press to make it move, and its movements begin to become more precise. Within a few days, it can repeat the entire process in a matter of seconds, with almost absent-minded ease. This bears a striking resemblance to a young child's learning curve when solving a puzzle. The next time you see a horse knock over a bucket or untie a rope, remember that this might not be mischief, but rather an active process of experimentation. Now let's look at the same topic from a different angle. The wind suddenly shifts, a plastic bag takes flight, its rustling lingers in the air for a moment, and before you even realize what's happening, the horse has already leapt to the side. Most people interpret this reaction as irrational fear. Yet there's a calculation at work there too. It's just a calculation that operates much faster. An unseen, uncertain, fast-moving object translates into the decision, this could be dangerous. Get away first, then assess in the prey animal's brain within milliseconds. That slow, layered calculation in the narrow passage and this sudden leap are two states of the same system operating at different speeds. One performs a detailed analysis when there's no time pressure, while the other prioritizes safety when uncertainty increases. Neither of these is not thinking. They are two distinct modes of thinking, each optimized for specific conditions. The same horse can switch between these two modes within a single day, and which mode kicks in is determined by its past experience and its current level of confidence. Now, returning to the narrow passage, what the horse does there is not all that different from what a horse does when solving a mechanical puzzle. It assesses an obstacle, compares it to its own body, and chooses one option from among several. Should it approach from the right, from the left, or not enter at all? The difference this time is this: there is no mechanical contraption involved, only the measurements of its own body. So, to summarize this section, solving a closed mechanism and passing through a narrow passage are two different facets of the same patient trial-and-error mindset. Has your horse ever experienced anything like this? Take a moment to think about it. This spatial calculation is just a small part of a much broader and far more impressive ability. Horses can memorize complex routes stretching for miles and recall them years later with minimal error. As they approach a turn, they can predict the correct direction in advance without seeing any signs. This isn't just a "I've been down this path before" kind of memory. It's proof that they carry the general structure of the path, the turning points, and the distances in their minds like a mental map. While you can't even fully memorize a path you've used for weeks, a horse, whether ridden or not, internalizes that path. Just think about it. You can also trace this ability in wild herds across America's open plains. Groups of Mustangs that repeat the same pasture-to-water route season after season without deviation are living proof that this mental map has remained functional across generations. In fact, the horse might know the path you walk together every day in far greater detail than you do. Not just where to go, but how sharp each turn is and where the ground slopes. This is exactly when the mind map kicks in during moments like passing through a narrow gap. The horse doesn't just look at the gap based on what it sees in that moment. As its eyes scan the opening, another layer in its mind has already begun to work. Memories of passing through similar gaps, accumulated experience regarding its body width, perhaps a past experience of being squeezed. All of these come together to shape the split-second decision. Although this happens in a matter of seconds, it's a calculation underpinned by a layered information processing process. As each passage adds a new data point, the calculation becomes a little more accurate each time. If you want to compare it to a GPS, the difference lies precisely here. A GPS simply tells you turn right on the screen. It doesn't remember yesterday's traffic or the pothole from last week. It doesn't factor in past experience at all. The map in your horse's mind, however, carries a trace of every past journey. It knows which turn has slippery ground, where it once got spooked, and which shortcut is safer. In a way, your horse functions both as a map and as someone who has added their own notes to that map over the years. In short, a horse's mind functions like a living map that carries not only the present moment, but also the traces of the past. There's another interesting detail. Not every horse performs this calculation in the same way or at the same speed. Researchers have found that, just like in humans, horses have personality traits that remain consistent throughout their lives. Some horses are curious and prone to taking risks. Others are cautious and slow to make decisions. That moment of hesitation you see at a narrow passage isn't just due to the difficulty of the passage. It's also shaped by your horse's own decision-making style. A bold horse makes a decision at a glance and moves forward, its ears still pointing forward, its stride unwavering. A cautious horse, on the other hand, changes its angle 3 or 4 times for the same passage, shifting its weight to its hind legs and pausing a bit longer. Does your horse make quick decisions, or does it weigh its options at length? This question reveals far more about your horse than you might think. There's also a practical side to this. Rushing a cautious horse interrupts its natural decision-making process, potentially leading to unnecessary hesitation or tension. Conversely, moving too slowly and guiding a bold horse can turn into a frustrating or even demotivating experience for it. Knowing how quickly a horse thinks also gives you a clue about how you should work with it. Just as you're making that calculation, when you rush a horse, you're forcibly cutting short an unfinished process. Even if it seems like a simple wait a moment to you, to the horse it's an incomplete assessment. This may be why some horses that are rushed react with more tension or hesitation than expected. Patiently waiting through those few seconds, however, is one of the most productive investments you can make, because a completed calculation always yields a safer result than an incomplete one. So the takeaway from this section is clear. How you work with a horse should be shaped by how quickly it makes decisions. Everything we've discussed so far, distances, mechanisms, routes, has been the horse's own calculations regarding its body and surroundings. But this ability extends in another direction as well. It may include you in the calculation. Research shows that horses can follow a person's pointing gesture, and sometimes not just the hand, but even a head movement or the direction of a glance. Moreover, they don't stop there. They can also distinguish whether the person pointing actually knows something or is merely making a guess. This is a highly developed form of social reasoning that most people assume is unique to dogs. Dogs may have acquired this skill through thousands of years of domestication while living closely with humans, but it's still not entirely clear where horses acquired it. When you look in a certain direction or point at something, the horse may not just be following your movements. Perhaps it's silently asking itself, does this person really know what they're doing? What this really means is that when you give your horse a command with an uncertain, indecisive demeanor, the horse can sense it, because it's not just reading your movements but also the confidence behind them. When working with a horse, it's not just what you do that matters, but also how confident you appear. Some of the moments when you think your horse isn't listening to you may actually be moments when it senses that you aren't even confident in yourself, which is a valid assessment, because following an indecisive leader is not a sensible strategy for any prey animal. In short, this silent assessment your horse makes of you is, just like the others, a part of its intelligence. This ability to calculate is not something innate or fixed. It develops with experience like a muscle and grows stronger over time. A young, inexperienced horse, when faced with a narrow passage or unfamiliar terrain, can hesitate for minutes on end. It turns its head back and forth repeatedly, takes a step back and tries again, because its pool of past experiences to draw upon is still limited. An older, experienced horse resolves the same situation much more quickly. The reason isn't that it thinks less. On the contrary, it possesses a much richer library of references. That change you might think of as your horse calming down over the years is, more often than not true calmness at all, but simply the acceleration of its decision-making. Perhaps this is why spending time with an older horse feels so reassuring. With its unhurried demeanor and calm gaze, you're facing a mind that truly hesitates less. The question, how does a horse think, cannot be explained by a single mechanism. On one hand, there's mechanical problem-solving involving closed circuits and narrow passages. On another, spatial memory that carries routes spanning miles. And on yet another, an individual decision-making style shaped by each horse's unique pace and level of caution. There's also a social reasoning system at work, observing and evaluating you. All of these processes operate simultaneously within the same skull, often silently, without you even noticing. Perhaps that's why there's no single answer to the question, how does a horse think? Every horse is a distinct mind, thinking at its own pace and according to its own priorities. Now, for a moment, put yourself in that horse's place. In fact, you do exactly the same thing every day without even realizing it. You adjust your shoulders as you pass through a door, you gauge the distance as you walk through a crowd, and you decide whether to trust a person's word or their guess. The only difference is this: you make these calculations not with words but with automatic reflexes, just like the horse. Perhaps what we call thinking is simply a form of calculation that is much simpler and much more widespread than we realize. It's something not only we do, but also that silent, big-eyed animal right beside us, doing it nonstop. Next time, you might notice this. Watch that moment when the horse pauses as it passes through a narrow gap or takes its first step onto an unfamiliar surface, because that pause is not a blank. On the contrary, it's the moment when its mind is working most intensely. Perhaps next time you'll be able to watch that few-second pause without impatience, perhaps even with admiration, because right there, before your very eyes, spatial memory, past experience, personal decision-making style, and perhaps even an assessment of you are all intertwining simultaneously. What do you think was the most impressive mental process or problem-solving your horse has ever done? Maybe it opened a door on its own. Maybe it found its way without any help. Maybe it followed your gaze and went straight to the right spot. Or maybe it was just that brief, careful pause it made while passing through a narrow doorway. Share that moment in the comments. Maybe you'll see more clearly now just how complex a mental process that moment was. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss content like this.